What I'm holding is the actual letter I wrote to my mother on the 6th of January, 1981, just days after the Rendlesham Forest incidents. It predates the Halt memo by a week. And what I describe in this is the first night's incidents, because I'd called my mother and been cut off on the phone, and it got me in a lot of trouble, so I figured I'd write her and be coy and tell her what they told us in the debrief about the first night's incident, which actually I thought had happened just before we got out there, and that wasn't the case. So I thought I was being clever. I was 19, and I took a big risk doing it, and it got through. And this is the envelope that I sent to my mother, and it's Armed Forces, Air Force Postal Service, stamped in frank marks. My address in the military was A1, Air 1 First Class, Lawrence P. Warren, Social Security number, 81st Security Police Squadron, P.O. Box 997, APO, Air Post Office, New York, 09755, to my mother, Miss Joanne E. Warren, 90-7, Robert Gardens Apartments, Weeks Road, Glens Falls, New York, 12801. And that zip code now is Queensbury 102804, so it's a long time ago. That's the actual envelope. And on the back of it, I write, P.S. I forgot to put in the letter, something with the letter, what is Jeff's address? And that was a friend of mine. And there's some of my mother, who was a bookkeeper, there's some of her probably doing her bills on the back of the envelope. That's her handwriting. And that's that. I wrote, funny, there's cartoons here. And I drew Larry, Jeff, and Steve. These are two guys I brought in the Air Force. And then I put my recruiter head sticking out of the, Jack Gorman was his name. And I wrote, gee, who can I bullshit today? Because the Air Force had gone sour for me at that point. So the letter is, that's the one. So there's a lot of history, current events in this letter. Not just the incident, which gives to the authenticity. And I figured after I got cut off on the phone, I'd have to follow it up so she didn't worry. So it's 6 January 81, which is the military way to write a date. Not the American way, but in the military we do it like the English do. And I wrote, Dear Ma, Sam is my sister, and Mike, who was our cat, can't help it, that's how it was. How is things at home? I hope good. I'm okay. I wasn't. Please don't be too upset that it has taken me so long to write. I think that was because I told you all I was doing on the phone and could not think of anything else to say. So page 4, remember I was telling you about that UFO that landed? Well, I'll tell you the whole story on it. Over Europe and England, a bunch of lights were seen. Over London, one of the lights broke into about 20 smaller lights and flew in all directions. At about 3 in the morning, a guy I know in D-Flight of security police told me, and of course I was the guy, I was being clever, he reported a falling star outside the weapons storage area. Post officer, I can't tell you what they keep in there, but use your imagination. Anyway, he reported it, and then everyone started feeling strange. Then a guy on the back gate at Woodbridge reported a bright light moving through the pine forest. We didn't even know the name, it was Rendlesham then. An officer and 2 sergeants responded, but they could not, I didn't know who they were. They could not take weapons because they were off base. Over the radio, they reported seeing an object about 7 by 8 feet in size. But they said every time they would get near it, it would seem farther away all of a sudden. They also said that all the animals in the forest were going nuts. Then all of a sudden, the light went out. And over the radio, they said they didn't like the situation and wanted to go back to base. But they were told to keep on investigating. Then they said the thing appeared behind them. It seemed like it was playing games. After 3.5 miles of following the thing through countryside and woods, the thing just disappeared in a field. It was only about 10 feet off the ground. This is what a friend of mine said he heard on the radio. At the same time, me and 5 other guys were walking up a dark road about 2 miles from the base back from Ipswich because we couldn't get a ride. And this is before my incident kicked off. And we felt like we were being watched, and it was strange because there were no street lights. Then we saw a bright light go right over us about 50 feet up and just fly over a field. It was silent. We first thought it was an A-10 jet, but they screamed. So we ran away because witchcraft and black magic is big in this part of Suffolk. Oh, and we thought that witches were in the woods because that light just seemed to jump over the trees. The next day, it turned out we're in the same place as the UFO, so I think we saw it too. Now, the 3 people who chased it can't and won't talk about it at all, and supposedly no animals have gone back into the woods yet. They did find 2 landing sites and supposedly some equipment left behind. A big C-130, this is important, man, because it came in and took something in a crate away, and a few days later, and the guards were flown in from somewhere else. It is strange, and now I hear that strange things have been going on in the forest for the past few weeks. And remember, we did get cut off on the phone. So I was being it's hilarious now to read it kind of knowing, I feel like my son wrote this. I'm trying not to upset my mother, and I'm like, oh well, my life's been screwed. So I go through this telling the first night's event. I try to put in what did happen to us earlier. I'm thinking I can't get in trouble, really, distancing myself. Oh well, on New Year's Eve, about 20 of us had a great time and jumped in fountains and all this. I can't even read it. I just hope if it comes down to me getting out, because I wanted to get out right away, you don't hold it against me. Tell Sam, that's my sister, to work hard in school. It was the last year of high school. She's a grandmother now. It's almost over for her now. Tell her. Pull the cat's ears for me, and Ma, like I always said, don't work too hard. P.S. Ma, and I wrote this in the post office in an afterthought before I left in a different pen, because I was just about to mail it, and I got it in our base post office. I wrote, P.S. Ma, when I get home, I'll tell you the truth about the UFO. I can't in the mail, they read it. This is the logic of a 19-year-old, unsophisticated kid, very confused and trying to pretend everything's great, but please let me, I'm trying to tell you something here. But it verifies the phone call. It verifies definitely the first night. It verifies I'm the guy on D-Flight, a friend on D-Flight, but it's so disjointed and bizarre, and my head was so wrong. And this is before the Halt memo was even typed by a week.
And it's describing the first night specifically.
Well, I'm describing the first night because in our debriefing, we had that basically outlined to us. And therefore, I thought that all this must have happened in one night, and we were responding to that incident. It turned out a couple years later, it was not the same night, but I thought I can't get in trouble for writing what they're telling me because I wasn't in that first night. Wasn't on duty. I was with them girls in Germany.
So why didn't you put in the letter what you saw on the third night?
What I was trying to do is confirm to my mother an incident happened because I got caught calling her, and I wanted to tell her the importance of this. So I told her what the federales told us in the debrief so she could have a sense of how big it was as a very young, fucked up person at this point. And because I'm reading this now and saying, God, I'm jumping to all kind of things and trying to be clear. I would have been in jail. And I wrote that because if I wrote what I went through, then I would be accountable instead of hearsay. And that's why I did that. That was my tactic. And the end of the letter, I'm trying to give her a hint because I couldn't send it just like this. I remember writing this letter. It was dark outside. I was at my desk at the window, and my roommate had books. I can remember writing this. And I went to the post office the next day, mailed it on the 7th, the morning, obviously. And I go to the post office. I remember the desk on here, and the desks were here. And I said, before I went, I go, there were some pictures with this, but nothing to do with the incident. And I tried to make it covert. And that's where I added on the desk real quick, looking around, P.S. Ma, when I get home, I will tell you the truth about the UFO. I can't in the mail, they'll read it. And that was to protect me as a very young person thinking I was being clever. As the years went on, and then obviously Halt wrote his memo. And then 2 days after that, my mother responds to me. Well, Larry, you certainly explained your situation with the UFO. And as you know, what you and others saw was just that, a UFO. It must have been quite an experience. And that was 2 days after Halt's memo was written. We sandwich in Halt's memo.
So let me understand something. When you wrote to your mom to say, I'll tell you the real truth about it,
I'll tell you the truth.
you're referring to the night that you experienced something
Exactly.
directly, which you couldn't speak about your own story, but you felt okay.
Exactly.
That you were allowed to speak about the story that you had heard from the other guys.
We were debriefed and told that it wasn't a rumor. The debriefers told us basically an outline that I wrote, because I kept it in my head, and I said, well, that must have been, they didn't tell us it was 3 separate nights, but so I said, oh, that's why we went out there, so we're not alone in this, you know? And
So you heard about it from the debriefer.
I was told by the debriefers, our whole room was, that they described the outplay of some of the incidents. Yeah, I didn't know Peniston and Burroughs at all, and that is pretty accurate for what happened to them. And it is the only authentic, original kind of account. And I can remember writing this letter 35 years ago, almost 36 years ago. I can remember mailing it. And I remember the afterthought. I said, well, I have to let her know. But it verifies also the phone call, and when we got cut off, 100%. Everything I said is verified here. But that's why I was telling the first night's event, because I said, well, I can't get in trouble for something I wasn't involved in. And if I tell what happened to me, I could only do it in real life. And that's the agenda there. That's what it was.